Next week is the beginning of Advent. If you're new to church or like churchy type stuff, Advent's kind of like an older tradition in more traditional churches, and we're definitely not that traditional of a church, as you can tell this morning. But we do celebrate Advent, and so we're going to be doing a 4-week teaching series on Advent starting next week, and we're going to be talking about the gospel message. So the good news. How does the good news affect our lives, and how can we see the good news in the story of Christmas? So really encourage you. It's a great series to invite your friends to as we lead into our Christmas Eve service. But today, I just want to share something that I feel like God put on my heart. It's not part of the series. We just finished a series, and we're about to start a new one. So this is just a standalone series. And praying for our church and getting to know the people in our church and all of that, I just had this sense that today God really wants to encourage people. And so I just want to ask you, don't raise your hand, is life going great for you today, or the past week, or the past month? And there's a few of you in here who are like, yes, and then the rest of us are like, well, and then some of us are like, don't even ask, right? So for those of us where life is not perfect right now, I think this word is for you, and that's my hope that this word is for everyone then. And I was reading and praying, and there's this awesome moment in the New Testament where Jesus gets up in front of the synagogue, right, the church of his day, and he opens up the Bible and he reads this passage. And that's the passage that we're just going to focus on today, okay? In my life right now, I've got a couple of things that I would say I'm frustrated about. There's a couple of things that I'm praying for and have been praying for a long time now. And at least for me, it feels like a long time. It's probably been like a week or two. But it feels like a long time, and I don't see any movement in these things I'm praying about. There's things I care about, and I want to see change happen in these things I'm praying about. Some of them are in my life, some of them in lives of people I care about. You know, when you pray about stuff, you care, right? Your love for them or your desire to be a better person motivate you to pray. And so I'm praying for these things, and things aren't changing, and I'm frustrated. And I just want to say that, like, I'm frustrated and I feel powerless. And I feel like it's out of my control. Like, I pray for these things. I can't manipulate God. I can't manipulate the situation. I can't force people to do what I think they should do. And so all I can do is trust God. But sometimes it gets tiresome. It gets hard. And so I'm in this place in my life where I feel a rising level of frustration. The other day, Mandy was like, the worst thing that a wife can say to a husband, or vice versa, husband to a wife, is, are you in a bad mood today? Right? Because, like, instantly you are. If you were feeling good up until that point, right, you're like, oh, I'm in a great mood, If someone asks you in a bad mood, you're like, yeah, I am, right? Like, it just, I don't know, like, why? Why do you say I'm in a bad mood? That's usually my response. And I was like, I'm fine. And as the day wore on, I was like, I am in a bad mood, Have you ever been in a bad mood that you just can't kick? And like, I prayed about it. I was like, what do I have to be? And I feel like it was some of that frustration boiling over. You get some frustration in your life, and there's nowhere for it to go. And it's not like I was like, not praying about it, but it just, sometimes you just hit that wall. Now, I wonder if any of you are struggling similarly to that in this room, or maybe worse. Like, I feel like what God wants me to talk about today is that some of us are just hitting a wall. We're struggling, or worse. We've lost something in life that we're grieving the loss of, whether it's a person or a job, or a hope, or a dream, or we're frustrated. Like at work or in a relationship, we're just frustrated. Like the life is just a grind right now. And there's not a whole lot of hope in your heart right now. And Jesus came into the world to address hopelessness. He came into the world to address that powerlessness that we feel as people. And so back to what I was saying, he gets up in front of this congregation and he opens up the Old Testament. So if you're not familiar with the Bible, we have the Bible's broken into Old Testament and New Testament. And the Old Testament would have been what Jesus would have read. So one of them was this prophet named Isaiah. And he starts to read it. He says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And he starts to read this beautiful passage from Isaiah. And then he reads it and he says, today in your hearing, this is fulfilled. And he goes and sits down. It's a radical, radical statement of Jesus where he reaches back into the Hebrew people's history, and he grabs this prophecy of the Messiah, the Savior who was to come and save the world. He reads it and he says, this is me. This is why people wanted to kill him pretty quickly, okay? Because he was claiming to be God very outrightly. But what I want to do is go back to the original text. So we're going to go back to Isaiah 61, and I want to read the whole thing together today, okay? We're going to read this whole thing, and then we're going to talk about it for our lives. So this is what Jesus was quoting. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." I want you to hear the hope that Jesus has as he talks, okay? He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance for our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Okay, listen. If you can just get past the poetic ancient writing. So some of this isn't the way that we talk today. But there's deep truth that's embedded in these words. And so it's very poetic and it's very prophetic. Like if you read the Bible, there's a lot of different genres of literature. The Bible isn't just a book. It's more accurately, I would more accurately refer to it as a library of writings that all have one thread, one narrative from beginning to end. And there's different genres, and this is what would be called a prophetic genre or a poetic genre. So I want to look at it, but I want to glean from it what we can glean for today. Because the Bible tells us that the Word of God is useful for today. So what does it have to say to us today? So the first part says, the Spirit of the Lord is on Jesus to proclaim good news to the poor. So as you're going through this hard time in life, as you're battling, as you're frustrated, as you're grieving, as you're working through something difficult in your marriage, if you're working through something difficult, if you're in crisis right now, something's happened in the last month that is just like a bomb went off and a lot of the shrapnel hit you. We start with the hope that God is not overwhelmed, okay? I want to say that to you today. I want you to hear that no matter what you're going through today, no matter what your friend is going through, your loved one is going through, that God is not surprised by what is happening in your life, and God is not overwhelmed by what is happening in your life. And we can get into arguments about how much does God author stuff, and does evil happen? That's not today. I do talk about that stuff sometimes, but that's not today. Today we just want to talk about the fact that Jesus comes to proclaim good news. And the word there, good news, is the same word we're going to talk about the next 4 weeks. It's the word gospel. That's where the word gospel came from. The good news is that Jesus came to right the wrongs, to heal the sick, to bring hope to the hopeless, to bind up the broken heart. The good news is all the things he says. Remember, Jesus said, "This is me. I'm here to lay my life down and rise from the dead again to defeat the enemy and to defeat death and to give you a life of hope and a life of meaning and a life of purpose." And this isn't just about when you die and go to heaven, right? Which a lot of Christians would say. This is about right now. Jesus is preaching good news to you and me right now. He's saying, I have a gospel, a good news of hope and healing right now because God is not overwhelmed. And here's what we know is that our hope is in Jesus, and that's the good news. See, the bad news would be if Jesus didn't come. The bad news would be that you have to figure it out all on your own. You need to figure out how to overcome this thing. You need to dig deeper into yourself. I was reading a Facebook post yesterday, and it's a person who, I don't know, they're faithy, right? That's what I would say. They have a Christian background, but they clearly aren't following the Lord in a way that I would say is the traditional historical way of following Jesus. So that they've incorporated some other types of faith into their Christianity. It's faithy, right? It's spirituality. And they're talking about how they made this big change in their life, and they said they're so grateful that they listened to the inner voice of wisdom deep inside their soul. And I was like, what? I don't get that. I've listened to the inner voice of wisdom deep inside my soul before, and it's told me to do some really bad things, right? Their whole worldview is that to find joy and happiness, they just need to hear themselves really clearly. So who's God in that story? They are. They are the God of their life. And I think that that's terrifying. I'll just be honest with you. I think that's bad news. If I am the God of my life, that is bad news. If my salvation, okay, from my own sickness, my own brokenness, Maybe you're all perfect, but I'll stand here and tell you I'm broken. I'm sinful, selfish, conceited. I hurt other people without even thinking about it, and sometimes I hurt people and I've thought about it, right? Like those are bad things about me. And if I am my own savior, that is bad news. It's bad news if when I get faced with things that are outside of my control, see, that whole philosophy of dig down deep and find my own truth works great until things happen outside of your control. I can't control sickness, can you? I can't heal people. I can't bind up the brokenhearted. I can't set someone free who's living in darkness right now. I can't free you from the darkness of addiction. I can't speak a word of wisdom, true wisdom that comes from, right, something beyond just my own experience. If I'm speaking into your situation from all that is within me, that's just my experience. If this is all there is, that's bad news. And so Jesus came to say, I have good news. Our hope is in Jesus. When you're struggling, when you're low, when you're broken, when you're in crisis, when you have nothing else, you can look to Jesus. Our hope isn't in things getting easier. So sometimes we're like, I just have to get through this time. A friend of mine shared a really cool coaching clip, and the lady was talking about you have to get better at the hard, not just try to get through the hard. I can't wait till, whatever it's hard that you're going through, I can't wait till college is over. It'll just be so much easier. I can't wait till my kids get a little older. I can't wait till my kids are out of diapers. It'll just be so much. No, we have to get better at going through the hard stuff, and how Christians do that is they lean on Jesus. They say, my hope isn't when this hard time ends. My hope isn't when the crisis is over, because guess what? There might be another crisis. You can't control this stuff. If you build your hope on life getting better, you're going to be disappointed and you're going to be hopeless. Our hope's in Jesus, not on other people solving our problems, right? If you put your hope in other people, if you try to, blame shift or hand it off, you're going to be disappointed. Our hope is not in avoiding pain and living in like burying it or just ignoring it. Our hope isn't in self-medicating our pain. We've tried that, right? We've tried that with Netflix. We've tried that with alcohol. We've tried that with relationships that end in heartbreak. Our hope has to be solely based in Jesus. That's the hope. That's the good news, okay? God is not overwhelmed. And my message today is this: God's not done writing your story. Right now, wherever you are, if you're frustrated, if you feel like you've hit a wall, if you feel like our marriage is on the rocks, or my kid is making bad decisions, or my career is going nowhere, or my finances are so messed up, your story isn't ending right now. And the message for today is God's not done writing your story. So let's keep reading. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives, release from the darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, to comfort all who mourn. And what I would say when I read this, what I hear is that God is close to us. See, in your pain and your brokenness, you are not alone. See, look at how think about binding up the brokenhearted. You can't do that from a distance. You can't comfort those who mourn from a distance. You have to get up in it. God moves towards our pain. He moves towards our darkness. So whether you're in a time right now that you're in a hard time that you've created because of your bad decisions, we've all been there, or you're in a hard time because someone else's bad decisions, or you're in a hard time just because life is hard. No matter what it is, God is moving towards you. Nobody in this room or online who's watching is disqualified from God coming and healing your broken heart, releasing you from any prison that you're in, comforting anything that's hurting inside of you. See, you are not alone. Jesus tells us that he did not come for the righteous, but for sinners. This is who Jesus moved towards, right? This is a quote from Jesus. The book of Mark is one of the biographies of Jesus' life, and he said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous. I have not come to call people who think they've got their life all together. I've come for those who know they're broken." In another place, this is another one of the authors of the New Testament. His name's Paul. And Paul writes this beautiful, this is one of my favorite verses because I need this verse on a regular basis. He says, he was talking about praying and hearing God's voice, and God said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you." So Paul was going through a really hard time. He asked God to end the hard time, and God said no. He didn't end the hard time, but he said, "I'm with you. You're not alone." He said, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." That's what God told Paul. So Paul was like, okay, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses then. Instead of avoiding them or ignoring them or waiting to get through them or waiting till life gets easier, I'm going to embrace the hardness of life so that Christ's power may rest on me. And if you've ever been through a hard time in your life as a follower of Jesus, you know that you find God in those moments differently than you find him when life is easier. And it's because God moves towards the brokenhearted. In Psalms, it says that God is near to the brokenhearted. Another psalm says that God catches our tears. I mean, think about how close he has to be in order to do that. He moves near. He draws near. He's always moving towards your pain, your brokenness, your inadequacy, your frustration, your doubt. He's not afraid of any of that stuff. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, in insults, hardships, persecutions, difficulties. For when I'm weak, then I'm truly strong. Because why? I think sometimes when we're weak, we get broken of me being God, and we really, really, really rely on him. And our hope is in Jesus. So I think somebody needs to hear this today. And this is one of those preachings where I'm like, I don't know, God, why you've asked me to do this, but I try to do what God asked me to do and leave the rest up to him. So there might be 99 of you in here who are like, well, this isn't really helpful. But if one of you in here is hearing it, maybe this is for you today. And I would argue that all of us at some point will need this. And this is good theology for when you go through hard times. So put this in your back pocket if you're not going through a hard time right now, because you will eventually. We all do. I'm not like cursing you. Like life just does that. And when we don't have good theology, a good theology of suffering or a good theology of hard times, that's when you see people, when they hit a hard time, their faith goes off the rails. Because they've been told that when you follow Jesus, everything always turns out good. You just need to pray harder and have faith. And I would argue that's not biblical. God is close to you. God is moving near to you right now. You know that thing where it's like the footprints in the sand, and it's like there's 2 footprints, and then there was one. You were carrying me. I don't buy it. I think he walked with you. He's not going to pick you up, though. He's going to walk with you. God is close to you, right? But he's not going to like take you out of the situation. Psalm 23 says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you're with me. He doesn't say I won't fear the shadow of death because you took me out of the valley. No. He's in the valley, but he's not afraid of the evil. But he's still in the valley of the shadow of death. But God is with him. God joins him. I haven't suffered as much as, there's a lot of people who have suffered more than me. But I have had my share. And I can tell you that I know that God has joined us in our suffering. He's walked beside us in miraculous ways that we couldn't have known until we got there. He's met us through other people. He's met us through speaking to us through the Word of God. There's miraculous ways that he met us that I could never have known if I didn't suffer. So if you haven't been there, you will. Listen, you're not alone. God is with you. So number one, when we're going through these hard times, God's not surprised. He's not caught off guard, and he's not overwhelmed. He's not looking at your situation being like, oh man, what are we going to do, right? God's ready. And he's not only ready and completely confident and at peace and not stressed out and not overwhelmed and not worried, but the most calm person to ever walk the face of the earth is walking towards your pain. And he's like, I will be with you. Because God's not done writing your story. This isn't it. Your hard time, your moment of grief and pain and struggle, even if it's been years long, this is not all that God is going to do with your life. As we go on, he says he came to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. And super poetic, but I want you to hear the redemption here, okay? Beauty instead of ashes, joy instead of mourning, praise instead of despair. There's something so powerful and beautiful about this, but in the moment of our deepest pain, sometimes we don't want to hear this, right? And I get it, right? You don't want someone sitting down next to you being like, this is all going to turn out good, right? Like that's not what you want to hear. But the truth is that God's not done in your life. That's just the truth. Like this is a hard thing to talk about because you don't want to offer false reassurance, but what we believe as followers of Jesus is that God is a redeemer. So he takes the worst things and makes them good. And I could do a teaching just on this, and we can look at this. There's a biblical thread from the Old Testament and the New Testament that's all about this. One of the most powerful Old Testament verses. There's a big story around it that you can go read. But Joseph at the end of his whole story, it says, what the enemy intended for evil, God intended for good. I love it. God is so far superior to evil, right? He's not overwhelmed. He's so far superior to pain and grief and suffering that he's able to turn all of it into good. And I'm not saying so just buck up. Like, both can be true. Like, I love, if we go back, this is going to have to go back a ways here. If we go back, he's not denying that there are people who are brokenhearted and captives and prisoners and in pain and mourning. He's not denying that. He's embracing that. He's saying, yes, we will suffer and I will redeem it. He's not belittling your suffering. He's not saying, hey, get over it. He's saying, let's go through it together because I've got more for you. God's not done working in the bad, the difficult, the painful parts of your life. Like 5 years ago, I got hit with incredible anxiety. I had never really had this kind of anxiety in my life, and I've shared this before, but I've never known something to be such an incredible battle on the inside. And I've just always been like pretty rational, pretty together, very positive, very optimistic, and I just could not overcome this on my own. And it was super duper dark. And there were times where I was just like, there were some bad times, right? Fortunately, my wife is a veteran of dealing with anxiety and has battled it her entire life. So she didn't do the thing like, she wasn't ever frustrated with me, like, come on, right? She was so sweet, like at 2 or 2:30 in the morning when I was starting to have a panic attack, which is really I got them at very inconvenient times. But I was starting to have a panic attack at 2:30 in the morning, and I'd be like, she'd be like, you gonna be okay? I'm like, yeah, I got it. And I'd go sit on the couch and I'd be like, if I really acted it out, you would think I was really, really weird. Like, I don't handle anxiety well. I'm literally was having a panic attack. My heart's racing, my whole body's sweating, my stomach's upset. You want to just like run away from yourself, but you can't. I won't ask for a show of hands, but if you know, you know. And she would just come sit next to me and pray for me and just like for hours sometimes and be with me. And it was horrible. And there is nothing in me that's like, boy, I want to go through that again. But I can tell you on this side of it, I was on a phone call with someone recently and I was able to share my story. And I never understood how dark like mental health struggles could be until I went through it. And as a pastor and a friend, I am so grateful that I went through it. And if I could rewrite the history and not go through it, I wouldn't take that out of my story. Because sometimes you need to go through suffering. And I don't know how it's all going to work. Like someday we'll be in a place with Jesus, and this is part of our hope where there's no more suffering. But right now on this earth, I wouldn't take that away from me. And I still struggle with anxiety sometimes. It's much more under control, but it's part of my story now. And I'm grateful to have it because I have something I can give to other people. I have something in me that's been redeemed, and it's worth it. See, what you're going through right now, God is going to use. And I hope you hear me. I'm not saying like, so be okay with this. No, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to struggle. It's okay. And if you are, you should be leaning into your community and leaning into God. But we don't struggle as hopeless people. There's a verse in the Bible that says that we don't suffer as the world suffers. We don't. We have a hope that God is in control. Not that he's necessarily doing this to you, but he's not surprised by this. And he's like, this is going to be for something good for you and for other people. My mom was sick my whole life. Some of you know this story, right? Like 30 years of battling chronic, incurable disease called lupus. And it was hard. And there were moments of incredible joy and moments of incredible pain growing up as a family. But we stuck together through it. And like, that's hard. And I've doubted my faith over it. I've doubted God over it. I've yelled at God about it. I prayed as a little kid every day for my mom to be healed, and she never was. Like, I've had to wrestle with all that. My mom died at an early age, right? Like, early for, like, most of us at my age still have our parents, and I lost my mom, like, 8-9 years ago. Like, all these things are hard, and they're all painful. And, like, losing her is actually what precipitated the whole anxiety attack. It was a fun time in my life. But, I like how just my family laughed at that. Everyone else was like, I feel like we shouldn't laugh. It's like talking about his mom dying. It's okay. But you guys are like, all right. So all of that, we remember, all of that led to who I am today. Like, I think that it's possible I wouldn't have been a pastor if it weren't for my mom Like growing up having to learn compassion at an early age, having to learn like somebody who's suffering needs people to come alongside of them. When we were really, struggling as a family, there were two different pastors at two different seasons in our life who stepped towards our family. And they changed the course of our family's history. So like, you understand what I'm saying? God's not done writing your story. When we get in those dark parts, we're just like, I want to give up. I want to fold in. It's over. Why are you doing this to me, God? And we turn on God. And we stop doing the things we know we should to be healthy. We stop taking care of ourselves spiritually. We stop praying. We stop reading the Bible. We stop going to church. Those are all the worst things we can do at the hardest times in our life. And God's like, I am with you and I have more for you. Just stick with me. Even when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Guys, that's not a pleasant place. But he's going to walk with you through it. And as Christians, listen, I would be a bad pastor if I didn't say that life is going to be hard and it's going to make you doubt God sometimes. It's going to make you doubt the church sometimes. But stick with Jesus because he's the only answer. He's not one of the answers. Okay. That was a little intense here today. I apologize. All right. Next week's going to be way funnier. Okay. Okay, so this is how it ends. They will be called oaks of righteousness. So look how it changes, okay? It changes from what Jesus is going to do to then the people who were in those situations, okay? The brokenhearted, the mourning, the prisoners, the people in darkness. He starts to talk about us. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. All right, we're not going to do two songs at the end, I don't think. But listen, this is the good news, that God doesn't look for the strongest, best, most well-equipped, best-looking, smartest, got their act together people. He looks for all the people we just read about, the prisoners, the brokenhearted, the people living in darkness, and he plants them to display his glory. Your worst moments are God's fertile soil. Your hardest times are where God is planting his most productive seeds in your life. So don't give up. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on God's plan. He's not done writing your story. They will rebuild the ancient ruins. You will walk into other people's lives, and you will step into their lives as part of God's plan for their suffering, and you will help them rebuild their ancient ruins and restore places long devastated. You will renew ruined cities. And this is all very poetic, but you're going to come be a restorer. You're going to be an agent of God in the lives of others because you're not powerless in this story. And the feeling we get when we're hurting is that we're powerless. But you're not powerless. You have a part to play. You can lean in right now. You can lean into Jesus and the hope that he has for you. Worship team, you can come up. This is another one of my favorite verses. I have a lot of them, okay, but this one's good. This is Paul again writing. He says, listen, I was the least. I am the least of all the apostles. I don't even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God before he became an apostle. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. So I didn't earn this. It's not how great I am. By God's grace, I am an apostle. And his grace to me was not without effect. I love that. His grace to me was not without effect. He's like, you picked me up out of the depths, and by your grace you saved me, and I will never forget, and I won't let that go in vain. I worked harder than all of them. And then he's like, but not I. It was the grace. But I love that. He's like, I know how far God brought me up from, and that grace was not without effect. You are not powerless. Your life is not all the struggles. There's a part of your story, but it's not all of your story. God is not done writing your story. There is hope, not because of you, not because it'll get better, not because time heals everything, all those things people say, right? When we lost our 2 babies to stillbirth, people would sometimes be like, well, you just try again? As if like that next baby would just be a replacement and all would be well. It's like, no. Like we're gonna go through the hard time, but our hope isn't in having another kid. Your hope isn't in getting more money. Your hope isn't in finding a better job. If you're unsatisfied now, you will be unsatisfied then. you put your hope in Jesus, you put your feet on the rock of Jesus, then no matter what comes your way, you are ready and you have hope because you're not powerless. So this is what I felt like God wanted to share with you. I hope that it impacts somebody here today. I hope it's encouraging to know that this is the good news that Jesus came to speak to us, that you aren't alone, that even in the hardest times, you're not alone, right? That God's not overwhelmed by this. In fact, he has a plan, and if you will walk with him through this hard time, he's going to bring redemption. He's going to do something good in your life and through you in the lives of others because you're not powerless. You're not a victim here, okay? Walk with God, and he will lift you up, even in the hardest times, and that grace will not be without effect. You will make a difference in the lives of the people around you. Because ultimately, our lives are not our own. If we've chosen to follow Jesus, our life is not our own, right? We're here to live as a sacrifice for him, to his glory and to the good of others, right? Okay.